welcome everyone to episode 100 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and if I was late to this recording, it was because I had to take a moment to write my cat dead details later note that I had to leave for my co-host. Who is my co-host who's here with me today?
Well, it is I, the world's last living Puritan, Steve Guntley. This is the podcast about popping eyeballs, snapping pencils, and, of course, intestine attacks. That's because this is the podcast about RE-ANIMATOR, one of the canonical best horror movies of all time, the indisputable jewel of the Empire Crown. It is our 100th episode of this show, so we really had to pull out all the stops, not only talking about both of our personal favorite films, but one that's actually really important for not only the history of this show, but for the history of horror in general. And so, of course, we had to bring in not just one, but two incredible guests to talk about this monumental work. Jared, who the hell is here with us? This is so cool.
It is, and one wouldn't have been enough. So I reached out to a friend of the show, Michael Gingold, who you would have heard on the really, honestly, for lack of a better word, bizarre episode on Cinderella and fairy tales, which is about as anti-horror as you could possibly get, that Michael did with us. And we talked about, what movie would you like to come back for? And he said, RE-ANIMATOR's coming up soon. And we said, you got it, man. But, we couldn't stop there. But first, Michael, I just want to say thank you for coming back to the show and taking the time to talk about this movie with us. We're so happy to have you back.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
And we're really happy to be seeing as much of your pineal gland right now as we are. For those who can't see the video of this, you're missing out on an incredible From Beyond branded sun visor with a large protuberance coming out of the front. It's an incredible piece of headwear, and I'm very jealous of it.
Yeah, I'll tell the story behind this a little later.
Yeah.
Can't wait. But that's not all. We have another very special guest joining us to talk about RE-ANIMATOR. It is the person responsible for playing the character of Megan Halsey herself, but, just genre icon who you've seen in this movie, in From Beyond, in Castle Freak, in more recent things like You're Next and We Are Still Here. The one and only incomparable Barbara Crampton. Barbara, we're so glad that you took the time to join us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys. This is actually my first podcast celebrating the 40th anniversary of RE-ANIMATOR. You guys asked me first, so here I am. Woohoo!
Well, we're thrilled beyond everything.
Ahead of the game.
I've been geeking out about this all week. I've been very excited to have you on here and talk about this movie because, oh man, what a trip this film is. And it holds up so beautifully well. And I'm just really excited to get into kind of the meat of all of this. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So one of the things that we generally do with guests is we kind of have them talk a little bit about their history with horror movies or low budget movies, exploitation, stuff like that. I know when Michael was on the first time, that was kind of how we got into the conversation. For you, Barbara, I think it'll probably be slightly different, where we're definitely curious to know your beginnings and kind of what drew you just into Hollywood, but definitely like how it led to ending up getting this particular role. We have a lot of questions about going into this movie, but just, I guess, really briefly, just for appearance's sake, like what's your personal history like with horror? What was it like before becoming, an actor in the genre?
I can't say that I was totally a horror fan back then. I was an actor who wanted to work. And I think, I had done Brian De Palma's Body Double, and I think that was the only movie I had done. And then I did 1 year on a soap opera called Days of Our Lives. And I have a degree in theater from a university. And, I always thought, well, I just want to be an actor. Do I want to be a theater actor? I don't know. Do I want to be in movies? I'm not sure. I didn't know in my early 20s what I wanted to do. And this audition came to me because the original girl who had the part dropped out. And her mother read the script and didn't really like what it was doing. So she advised her not to do it. And so Jeffrey Combs was already cast, and I came in with a lot of other young girls auditioning for the role, and I remember just being in this office building, and Jeffrey was there reading with us, and Bruce was there, who played Dan Kane, and I was reading with him, and I read with a couple of other guys, and I feel like we were there for a few hours. And every time we would go in and do a scene, Stuart would give us direction. And then he would say, okay, go out into the hallway and work on it and come back. That's never happened to me since. Like, I've been in auditions, although I don't audition so much anymore. Mostly, you're either on it, you do like a little video of your audition, or, somebody offers you a part. I mean, I haven't been in the room in years. But anyway, sometimes in a room, they would give you direction, and then right away you would make an adjustment, you would do it. But Stuart, being in the mind of the theater director, was like, go work on it. Here's my notes. So we would go out into the hallway, work on the material, come back in. And then we repeated that process like 3 or 4 times. It was really fun. And as the day went on, there were less and less Meg hopefuls there, and less Dan Kane hopefuls. And at the end of the day, it was just the 3 of us. And I kind of felt at the end of the day, although they didn't tell me that I probably had the part, but I wasn't sure. And I think, I can't even say, yeah, that's a horror movie, right? So I can't even say, even after that, the experience of filming that movie ended, and, we filmed for, I think it was like 18 or 19 days right before Christmas. And we went overtime almost every day because Stuart would just never stop. He had another thought. He had another note to give you. And, he kept wanting to do it again and again. And I famously have said that I made more money in overtime on that movie than I made in my regular salary. That's how much overtime we did. So, I mean, literally, I can remember the last few days going like 6 hours over. I got a check for so much money for my overtime. It was ridiculous. Amazing. It was like thousands of dollars.
Well, it's an interesting process, because it's like that. I mean, I've heard this story told a few times of like Stuart Gordon's approach to stage directing and rehearsals and stuff. And I feel like when I was young watching RE-ANIMATOR, something about that movie clicked to me, and I could never put my finger on what it was. But there was just something, like the characters felt so lived in as soon as the movie starts. And it makes complete sense hearing retroactively that's how it was done, because everyone feels so comfortable.
Yeah, we rehearsed for 3 weeks. Once I had the part, and I think maybe it was around September or so that we all got cast, and then we rehearsed in my living room because I had the biggest living room for whatever reason. And just people came over, and we were there for 3 weeks rehearsing everything. I knew my lines backwards and forwards. I knew the guys' lines. I knew everything. And it was really lived in. And I think also there was a bigger feel to it than, the 80s had their bigger moments in a lot of movies, but this one also felt very operatic in a way, and bigger than life, because Stuart, even on film, wanted us to play to the back of the house. He just, we also had a thing that we always said about him: more is not enough. So we would want more screaming, more crying, more panicking, more this, more that. So he, it's interesting because as time went on, and subsequently when I'd worked with him later, he wasn't pushing me as much to play to the back of the house, but in that movie he did. And I think that's part of its charm. Yes, it feels lived in because we rehearsed it a lot, but it also is very, big and grand, and it feels full in every sense of the word. And maybe that's why, one of the many reasons it's so beloved to this day.
I mean, we've covered a great deal of Stuart's work on this show. Actually, unfortunately, this is going to be the last Stuart Gordon movie that we cover that's within kind of the sphere of Empire and Full Moon. If we want to have a Space Truckers episode, I want to have that conversation, because that movie rules. But I was curious because we've covered him in the past. He is coming out of the theater world. He and his wife, Caroline, they were the founders of the organic theater
Carolyn.
company. Oh, Carolyn,
Yeah.
excuse me, Carolyn.
Carolyn.
They came out of the organic theater company, which they founded in Chicago, which is a really influential and experimental theater company. But this is his first feature film that he's been making. Did you sense like any kind of reticence from him, like being behind the camera for the first time, or was he just he had a pretty clear idea of what he wanted to do?
Oh, Stuart never had any reticence about anything. He was a really confident person. And even if he didn't know something, he was always confident in his approach. We had the first DP that we had wasn't turning in the kind of work that a couple of the producers, mostly Albert Band, really, well, he wasn't really credited as a producer. I mean, it's a little airy-fairy.
Your Charlie's retelling of it, these decisions about the DP and things like that were coming from Charlie, but via Albert.
Oh, I guess so.
Outsourced to Albert.
Well,
he basically asked Albert to come in.
I mean, but they didn't really, I mean, I guess they helped produce the movie, but mostly they were the distributor of the film.
Yeah.
But they did help a lot. And Albert, maybe it was Charlie. Yes, I talked to Charlie about this too, just on the phone the other day, because I did a little article for the January issue of Fangoria about it. Everyone just decided, okay, we have to make a change, and we're going to go with Mac Alberg. And I think we had shot like maybe 3 days, and those scenes were the scenes that were in the house that Meg and Dan, that Dan lives in, that Jeffrey's character comes to stay with him. I mean, they didn't look horrible or too dark to me, but they didn't like it for whatever reason. So I was, what do I know? I'm just an actress for hire. So I'm like, okay, here's your new DP. Well, hello. And Stuart, would ask Mac to, cover the scene in a certain way or move the camera here. And he didn't really know that much about where the camera should be. And frequently, I think he made some errors about, what he wanted, because Mac would say, no, we can't put the camera there because that's crossing the line. Or, I think you need to cover the scene from this angle. And then there would be discussion about it. And I think that Stuart, even though he doesn't like to, probably wouldn't want to say that he leaned on Mac at all, I think he trusted him and took his advice quite often. And, Mac was like a master. He knew what he was doing for sure.
And it's a very different medium. Yeah. Film,
it was a different medium.
Very different. Yeah.
But he didn't, and I think also in the beginning, Stuart had read a book by Alfred Hitchcock saying you should only film the movie for the edit. And so I think he had in his head, I'm going to do that, because that's what Alfred Hitchcock does.
Yeah.
And that kind of went out the window after a while because honestly, you guys, like I said before, we shot so much. We got so much coverage and we did every scene, and in today's world, you might do a scene if you have, or like a setup, 3 times, maybe 4 times if you have time. I mean, we must have done this, even though we rehearsed for 3 weeks and we had everything down. I mean, we would do 10, 20 takes of something. It was insane. There was so much footage, and Stuart really worked with us as if he was further rehearsing a play,
Yeah.
I think it feels like a very cohesive movie today because, you just don't, everybody's in the same movie in this film.
Yeah.
Like nobody's doing something different that sometimes you see that, or you see performances that you go, well, I don't know if that like really fits in the film, but I think we all really fit in the film and we're all living in the same world. And that comes from a lot of rehearsal and a lot of takes and a lot of choices.
Yeah, no,
That's
I agree
incredible.
with that 100%. And I think, it really shows because this is a genre movie. It pushes the envelope in a lot of ways. And those kinds of movies didn't really get a lot of praise from critics at the time, but Reanimator was a surprising, festival and then critical hit. And so, Michael, this is probably a good way to segue to you for a sec, because, if I'm not mistaken, this movie kind of coincides with you kind of getting started professionally. I know you have a lot of strong ties to this movie as well. So like for me, I mean, came to horror as a kid too, but I was a little too young. I was not even 5 years old yet when the movie came out. So I was not able to see it then. But for you, Michael, as someone breaking into horror journalism at the time, what was that like?
Well, one little point I wanted to bring up is before we get to that is that even though Reanimator is a very cinematic movie, if you look at it, you can also tell Stewart had a strong theatrical background, because if you look at certain scenes like the ones in the classroom, the way he arranges actors in the frame, it's very precise the way a director would arrange actors on a stage. I remember watching with a friend of mine, we were both noting that the way he positions everybody, it's like he's treating it like a theater, like the movie audience is a theater audience, and placing the actors just the right way in the same respect.
Yeah, even the big the climactic scene with all the corpses coming to life and attacking, they're staged in such a beautifully theatrical way where like everybody's kind of, it looks like I don't know, just like a musical sequence almost, just without the music. Everybody's like coming up and having their own thing, and it's really cool. Yeah.
But to your question, I actually saw Reanimator about a month and a half after I started film school in New York City. And that was great. I was coming from suburbia where, to be honest, a lot of horror films were starting to play in the suburbs at that point. Most movies got up into the smaller towns, but then getting into Manhattan where you could see everything. I mean, there was a new horror film pretty much every weekend, even if it was only on 42nd Street or in a revival house somewhere. And I can still remember seeing Reanimator at the United Artists Theater. I think it was Broadway and 49th Street when it first opened. And I was aware somewhat about it because Fangoria had done a story on it where they called it a moist horror film. I forget who was quoted. They described it as moist. And the opening picture I'll always remember is a shot of Jeffrey with Dr. Hill's head in the pan. And
the
moment I saw that,
a moist pan, decidedly a moist pan.
A very moist pan, yes. So, and I just loved it. I thought it was so much fun, and I'd not really seen anything like it because there hadn't been at that point what they call splat stick horror film of that kind. There had been horror films that had humor in them, obviously. Fright Night had just come out that summer, I think, but none of them that really achieved their humor by pushing the boundaries of horror, by taking horror to a point where it was so outrageous and over the top that you also just kind of had to laugh at it at the same time without laughing at the movie, without poking fun at what was going on screen.
That's very true. Like there are no like set up punchline kind of moments in this movie, but and sometimes what you're looking at is horrific on paper, but somehow it's funny. I mean, I think it's because they're playing with the vulnerability of the human body as kind of a central thesis here, and something that we can all kind of relate to on a primal level. And we're making this hilariously obscene mockery of death, of one of these pillars, one of these things that we are all so solemn and so afraid of, and it's this grotesque mockery. I mean, I think I didn't even really have a way of crystallizing how funny it was until the scene where Dr. Hill puts the dummy head onto his severed corpse and is trying to walk into the morgue, and it's just so silly looking and so funny. I mean, it's brilliantly done.
The whole thing about the humor, everybody has a different story and sensibility about really what went down and why it's so funny, because I think that Stewart inherently was a really humorous person, and anytime you would talk to him about anything, he would always find what was funny in your conversation and always sort of sidebar and talk about that or make a joke or something. But he was so inherently funny and also had this outrageous mind that I don't think that he found Re-Animator to be as funny as it was. And I think it was also a surprise to him. Maybe he has a larger funny bone than most of us.
Hmm.
But it was, well, after the movie was completed and Richard Van had to do the score, the original cut was, well, this is not uncommon, but it was like more than 2 hours. That's not uncommon for an assembly. But then they had to, keep cutting it down. And there was some quite contentious conversations from what others have told me about what kind of music it needed. And Richard Van was the one that said, look, this is a funny moment. It's not really scary. We can't do a scary score. We have to highlight these moments so that people know it's okay to laugh and it's okay to have fun. And there was some real issues with that. And they weren't completely sure about it. And I feel like it was probably Richard that was the driving force of that. And then even then, I think Stuart was surprised at how funny people found it because, for him, he really wanted to shock people. And he had done that at the Organic Theater Company, famously staging a naked version of Peter Pan, which I'm sure you guys have heard about that. Maybe listeners haven't, but he always wanted to do some shocking things. And of course, I was involved in some very shocking scenes. And I think that was in his mind more than anything. I don't want people to laugh. I want people to be shocked, and I want people to see things that they've never seen before. And in the original movie, really, Dan Kane was supposed to be the star of the movie. It's Dan Kane's story. And Bruce is a fantastic actor, and he doesn't get enough accolades for his portrayal that grounds the movie so well.
He really is excellent.
Right. And then it's really Jeffrey Combs that I think Jeffrey inherently knew that it was really funny. And, although he didn't mug for the camera, he played up those moments very well, and his character kind of took over the whole narrative.
Oh, yeah.
So that when the movie came out, you felt like it was Herbert West's story more than Dan Kane's.
To this day, I have a hard time thinking of very many parallels to the performance that Jeffrey Combs is giving here as Herbert West. This character is so unique and so specific. It kind of defies like every archetype, like a reductive way of saying that he's an anti-hero, but he's not really. He never does anything heroic. He's also on paper, like strictly villainous, but something about the way that Jeffrey plays it, like the pathos that he brings to this character, that's all unsaid, it's all under the surface, but it does make him kind of a sympathetic character, kind of a pathetic character in his own way.
Really sympathetic? You find?
I think I'm sensing something about.
Tell me about that. See if you can convince me that.
Expand on that.
Well, okay, sure. I've got this lab in my basement. There's something really unspoken about, and there's something really tragic about this character because he's clearly developed this obsession with curing death. And we never really go into the reasons why, but I think it's clear that he lost somebody pretty traumatic from a pretty early age. And so he's vainglorious and he's trying to seek some scientific validation as well. But there's also something kind of primal in him that this is a guy who's clearly lost something and he's devoting his entire being to try and preventing that from happening again. And
you're a very nice, caring person because I don't know if I would say that. I don't know if I would put that on him. That's like one of those things where you have to examine the bad guy and go, well, he had a bad childhood, or had this or had that. I don't know if I could say that, but okay, go on.
But I mean, that's also not to say that he's not like kind of a twerp and a creep in this movie. Like he is such a jerk to your character in particular. I mean, he's like so dismissive and haughty and sexist, and like he's so single-minded and megalomaniacal about everything he does. But like, I think there's just such a peculiarity to Combs's performance here that really, he's a wounded, frightened animal in a lot of ways, and you kind of can, I don't know. I glommed onto him a little bit in that
Okay,
sense.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think for Jeffrey personally, I mean, it's a role that he's most known for, even though has a great body of work and has done, so much stuff on Star Trek and Peter Jackson's movie and The Frighteners and whatever. But
yeah,
I think
that's how I came to this movie. Was through The Frighteners. Yeah.
I think that he appreciates the love that people have for the movie and his character, but at the same time, I also think that he doesn't like that it defines him so much,
I can understand that. That's a tricky balance to pull off when you have like an iconic character that sort of steals focus from a lot of, like, I've genuinely never seen a bad Jeffrey Combs performance. Like, I love him in Star Trek. I love him, like, and he's been in many of the Full Moon movies that we've covered, and he always brings it, but there is something really,
he's not really a horror fan. Like, you asked me earlier about coming to horror, like, I become a horror fan. Maybe that's also because I started producing, many years ago.
Yeah.
But I think I came to love the horror genre after I did Your Next, after taking a break for a long time. And I came back and I saw how talented all those people were that worked on the movie, Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett and Joe Swanberg. And I was like, wow, these people are so great. And they're having so much fun. And I fell back in love with just making movies. And I went, maybe I'm a horror movie actress. Maybe that's what I do. And then I started like an education of watching many horror movies a week since 2011 so that I could catch up on stuff that I had never seen. And I really started analyzing movies in a way that I hadn't done before, and particularly horror movies. And I rededicated myself to horror. I don't think that Jeffrey would say the same thing. I think he likes acting, loves acting, and is a consummate actor, but just, he's like, I could do horror, I could do comedy, I could do this, I could do that, whatever. Sci-fi, I mean,
Yeah, he was a little, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
To talk about his appeal, all I know is I saw Re-Animator on a double date, and actually it was my first date with a girl who I wound up with for a couple of years after that. Re-Animator's actually been a big motivator in my romantic life.
That's so funny. And your current girlfriend really loves it too, doesn't she?
Oh yeah, we met at a convention years ago because she had come to see Jeffrey Combs because she's a huge fan of Re-Animator, and that was a long time ago. We've been on and off since then, but we've been back on for over a decade now. So,
okay.
So shout out to Shay, my girlfriend and fellow Re-Animator fan. But when I saw Re-Animator that first time in college, it was a double date, and the other girl was completely taken by Herbert West and kept talking about Herbie and how cute Herbie was. And there's
women love him.
Yeah,
it's true. There's something sexy and because he's so commanding and he's kind of nerdy, and there's a lot of women that like that.
We can fix him.
Just his reactions, like even down to a single line, like when they're looking at the corpses and they're kind of dismissing them, and he says malpractice, like the way he puts on a single word like that. He's I can't even look at him as the villain. I mean, he does motivate all the bad stuff that happens, but he's not. It's the old thing of like the villain doesn't think he's a villain.
Right,
he doesn't,
of course.
Yeah,
the best villains don't. Yeah,
right. And that play is so big in the movie because, like, at any screening I've been to of the movie, it's like any notion that Herbert West is going to be viewed as the villain is thrown right out the window, because when he says, "No, I gave him life," people cheer. It's, from that moment on, it's like they're captivated by him immediately.
I mean,
and again, there's something to the way, like, think of the scene, which I think another director and another actor might have posed this as a saving the day moment, at the end of the film when Megan is tied to the table and there's this horrible stuff going on. Herbert West walks in and is like technically like saving the day, but he's still doing it by being a condescending prick. And
he calls me a Tristan. He says Tristan with a bubble-headed co-ed.
Exactly.
But I wasn't that.
You were never painted as that in that movie at all. Yeah.
Right.
No, well, I never played it that way either. And I thought, obviously I had to do some very delicate scenes in that movie. And I remember even thinking at the time, I was a young gal in my 20s thinking, okay, if I'm going to survive this and come out standing tall, then I need to play Meg as somebody who's really smart and who has agency and stands her own ground. And to Stuart and Dennis Paoli's credit, they gave me a character that was just that. They just asked me to do some outrageous things. They asked all of us to do outrageous things. I mean, we all had to do crazy, weird stuff. My father had to, become like a reanimated corpse. Like, he went crazy and was in that padded cell. And then Dr. Hill, got his head cut off, and then he had to talk holding his head. I mean, that's a
wild thing to keep a straight face.
But everybody played it, like all of us played it. We didn't play into that comedy. We didn't play into the outrageousness. We really played everything for real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that comes across. And I think that's why the humor of it sort of sneaks up on you, because nobody's winking. And your character, Megan, gets so much more to do than a lot of young women characters in horror movies at this time. I think because it's very clear that Megan is a very tragic figure. She didn't invite any of this into her life. She had this kind of fairy tale thing going with, handsome young medical student. And, she had this, her own career going, and like she was happy and in love. And this weirdo just waltzes into her life, and almost immediately she loses her cat, she loses her dad, she loses her relationship, and she loses her life. Like, Megan is
that's right. It's so tragic. And every guy in the film has a different feeling about me and sort of treats me in a way where I'm useful or not useful to them in different ways. And I'm important to every single person, every single character in that film. There's something about Megan. I want her to either go away. I'm going to do everything I can. I want to keep her close. She's my daughter. This is my girlfriend. I want to, help her. Then this Dr. Hill's obsessed with her. So you're right. She had a lot to do. So when I read the script, and I didn't know that somebody else had turned it down, I just, got the audition. I was like, wow, this is and I had done a lot of theater by that time. I had done a lot of plays in college. I played Sally Bowles in Cabaret, and I did King Lear at the American Theater of Actors in New York. And so I had a lot of training and classical training. And I really, a lot of times in the 80s, if we can talk, about how a lot of women were exploited, obviously, back in the day, we weren't given those great roles. Well, I definitely was exploited, and I talked to everybody about it. It's no secret. But I was given a lot of agency, and I was given a lot to do. Yeah. So I didn't balk at it. I wasn't like, this is going to be the defining scene of my career or anything like that. I mean, I love that people love the movie and, love all the characters from the film. And then, you go and see a movie like The Substance and you see what Demi Moore is doing now. Like, I think I kind of paved the way.
I would agree 100%.
Right? For a lot of, because people were shocked, but
I think we're all pro substance on this movie, and I think I was thinking of Re-Animator a lot during that movie, if only for the green vials, and the syringes and everything like that.
And From Beyond, I mean, the character that she turns into kind of reminded me a lot of From Beyond, and I'd seen a lot of people on the socials that remarked about that, and I'm sure that's not lost on Coralie as well, the director. Yeah.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that From Beyond is my personal favorite Barbara Crampton performance. I think I love that you get to be one of the weirdos in that movie, and you just bring so much energy, and you are so fun in that movie. That's a personal favorite of mine. I love that movie.
My two favorites are From Beyond and Jacob's Wife.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Those are my two favorite roles that I've ever had.
Well, From Beyond is really, I mean, here you were going within the space of a year from a kind of innocent, not naive, but not very worldly co-ed.
Right.
Now you're a doctor, like a year
I
later.
know.
A year later.
Well, there was some concern in the casting of that too, where people were saying, we don't think she's old enough to play a doctor after that movie. And Stuart's like, no, she's playing it. That's Catherine McMichaels is going to be Barbara. People were like, well, no, you could cast somebody else. He's like, no, it's going to be Barbara. So he said, you have to get glasses. We're going to have to put your hair up. And I said, okay, and I'll lower my voice and I'll use, a deeper sounding tone. And now everybody believes it. I think I was 27 at the time. But I don't think anybody thinks now when they watch the movie, oh, she was too young to play that part.
No, the body language sells it. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Michael, I'll cut you off.
It worked for me from the very beginning. It's funny how I came to see that movie, talking about, my experience of seeing these films. I actually went with a friend of mine to see another Empire movie called Crawl Space.
Oh, yeah.
Klaus Kinski, weird movie.
Sunday afternoon, we get to the theater and they're like, oh, we're not showing it. We're having a sneak preview of another film. Said, okay, what is it? They said, it's called.
Wow.
I said,
yeah.
Apparently it had been this advertised sneak preview that I had not seen the advertisement for. So I said, okay. So we went and we saw From Beyond, and then we saw Crawl Space. But
wow,
that's a good double feature.
That was a good day at the movies.
Yeah.
And the other best part is they had the trailer for Dolls attached to it, which is a great
fun.
And then Dolls never actually played in the New York area, which was very disappointing. But From Beyond is
funny.
I mean, even before the unrated version came out, From Beyond is maybe equal or even a little bit above Re-Animator. In my mind, it's just so ambitious in its themes. It's a little more serious. It just has so much going on. I mean, I love Re-Animator. It's a great film. But From Beyond, Stuart really took another step in the ambition with that film.
Yeah. And it's really cool to see how quickly he was developing. Like, he's one of those filmmakers who kind of came out the gate with a super clear sense of like his aesthetic and his style, and he maintained it throughout the rest of his career. We've had such a great time talking about Stuart Gordon films on this show. We've covered all now.
Some real surprises too, like Pit and the Pendulum.
Yeah.
We like so much, definitely underseen, undertalked about. I can't believe I am outnumbered here of people who would, like, if push came to shove and I had to take one, I would take Re-Animator over From Beyond. I love them both.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm surprised to be in the minority. But for me, it was like,
sure. No, you could be in the minority here, but I think you're in the minority here, but I think most people would agree with you that they like Re-Animator more.
Well, it's like I was into horror and it was like, all right, I'm, 8, 10, 11 years old, but I'm into the mainstream stuff. So I'm watching Jason, I'm watching Freddy, I'm watching Michael Myers. It was probably a few years later, probably about 30 years ago, I would say, when I saw Re-Animator for the first time, and it just hit so different. It was like, whoa, this is different. It's almost like I had done my prerequisites and now Re-Animator was an advanced course in something.
Yeah.
And it opened up, it was like the movie that kickstarted like my own personal kind of pilgrimage into diving in and finding like slightly more obscure stuff that wasn't just major studio things. And that's really been kind of my bread and butter for the last 30 years of stuff that I've sought out. So the relationship that I have with Re-Animator is so strong because it was one of the first like movies that spearheaded me not just being surface level. Like From Beyond, I love From Beyond, but I didn't see From Beyond until probably 8 or 10 years later. Like I didn't see From Beyond until probably 20 years ago.
I feel like the cult following for that movie is a little more recent. I think people are kind of like, oh yeah, you like Re-Animator? Have you seen From Beyond? Like it's really, it's kind of, people are sort of recently coming around on that movie.
And I think that's because for a while, the only version you could see was the R-rated version.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
When the uncut one first came out on DVD, it's a revelation. There's so much stuff. And it was kind of odd because Re-Animator came out unrated, no one under 17 admitted. And then for whatever reason with From Beyond, they decided to cut it down for the R. And I'm wondering if they'd gone for an unrated release of From Beyond, whether it would have been higher in people's estimation from the beginning. I don't know.
And Michael, you might be able to confirm. I believe there was an R-rated cut of Re-Animator as well. That was weirdly like 10 minutes longer than the unrated cut.
Yeah.
Well, what happened
Yeah.
was at the time, Blockbuster Video was like the big video store chain in this country.
Sure.
Yeah.
It became this whole big deal, like people saying they won't take unrated movies. Well, that was
right.
really true. I would go into Blockbuster sometimes and I would see unrated movies that had sneaked in there. But a lot of companies prepared R-rated versions of unrated films just so they could get shelf space at Blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They actually took out the most objectionable stuff in Re-Animator, but put back in a whole bunch of new scenes, like I think Jeffrey injecting himself with the reagent is one. A couple of
This is a dream sequence.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So the R-rated cut, even though it's tamer, is longer. And I think the R-rated cut is on one of the Blu-ray editions that's out now. Maybe the Arrow one, the big box set.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know that the unrated one is kind of resettled back into being the definitive sort of version that you're seeing. And, it's definitely a movie that goes hard. I do want to shout out a couple of the other actors in this film that we hadn't mentioned. I really, every time I watch this movie, I get something new out of it. And I think this time going to it, I was really impressed by the performance by Robert Sampson, who plays your father, who goes from so urbane and stuffy and like respectable, and then becomes this wild-eyed feral beast for the back half of the movie.
Right?
It is an incredible transition, like not just a makeup transition. He is like really bringing it. And I also wanted to shout out David Gale, who
so good.
I feel a lot of the reason that people are not fully like condemning Herbert West as a villain is because Dr. Hill is in here to sort of set some of that off.
He's a villain too.
Well, he's the real villain in the movie. He's
about, that's a really good point, Stephen. Yeah.
Just like, because I think you need this guy who is just so creepy with like this much younger woman, and he just towers over her, and he's always like invading her space and using words like obsessed and like and he's a charlatan too at the end of the day. Like he's trying to steal Herbert's scientific discoveries, So there's something, you can unify behind him as a more clear-cut villain rather than the ambiguous, creepy stuff that Herbert West is doing.
Yeah.
And also,
are there any other movies that even do that? We could probably come up with a list if we thought about it, of a film where somebody's really an evil villain, but then there's another guy who's coming in to usurp that villain and doing worse things, maybe.
It kind of helps. It helps sell your sort of anti-hero narrative, even though I don't think they're ever going for that.
Point. I hadn't actually really thought about that before, but I really like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's
Herbert kind of brings out the few times that Dr. Hill is funny. Herbert West brings it out of him, like when he's snapping the pencil. And he'll, Mr. West, I suggest you buy yourself a pen. That gets a huge laugh.
Yeah.
I see it.
Oh, so funny. It gets a big laugh every time.
And he plays it so menacing from the beginning. Like you never get the sense that like he's about to yell at like Rodney Dangerfield for stomping on his flowers or something. He doesn't have that kind of, he has a menace to him the entire time. And when he gets to adopt the headless prosthesis and really kind of lean into the monster element of it, he is just this hissing, growling like beast of a thing, that's really terrifying. And a lot of this culminates, and I wanted to ask Barbara about this scene because probably the most infamous, shocking scene of this movie was the climactic moment in the morgue. And you mentioned that the previous actress had read this script and gotten to this part and just said like, nope.
Her mother did. Her
mother did. Okay.
No, she was good, but her mother read it. That's the story I'm told now,
Did you have a similar moment where you're just like, should I show this to my mom? Should I have somebody intervene, or were you just gung ho the entire time?
Well, of course it gave me pause. I looked at it. I was like, really? They want to do that? Oh my God. But I loved the part so much, and it was a really big part, and it seemed like a cool movie. And so I didn't, but also, I don't know, I probably was just more maybe I want to say I was world-wise than maybe that other girl was,
Mm,
because I grew up in the carnival business and my dad was a concessionaire
mm,
for fairs and carnivals, and I traveled through the country from the time I was really little until I was like 16. And so I'd seen a lot of stuff, just working with
yeah.
parties and, you know, so like it didn't shock me
Yeah.
as much as it would have shocked other people. But of course, there was some things that we had to iron out. As far as I guess they would call it a nudity rider now. I don't know what they
Yeah.
called it back then. It was just some sort of contract about what they were allowed to show and not show, and how many seconds the scene, particular angles were going to be. It was all in a contract. So
Yeah.
I agreed to that. And I, I was nervous when it first came out, but I don't think I got any dings for it at all. I
Yeah.
mean, I continued to work and whatever, but I will say it's because the character had so much more to do than just that. There were
Oh,
other
yeah.
ladies in the 80s that were just used for those exploitative moments, and then
Right.
they weren't hired again, but and it did make me think, oh, am I going to do this and not be able to work if I do this? Should I just not do it? But again, I just felt like the part was so good and so interesting. And I really liked Stuart and I liked the other guys. And, when they offered me the part, I said, yeah, I want to do this. This seems really fun.
I just kept thinking watching it this time that this must have required such a high level of trust in the people around you and a high level of vulnerability as an actor. Like this is a really singular kind of place to be putting yourself on screen, and you do run that risk of, like, luckily this didn't happen for you. You do run that risk of, like, this being the thing that you're remembered for. And luckily you had this very robust career since then. But
right. But when you say vulnerability, I'm naked and exposed, but vulnerability is so much more than that. I just saw The Brutalist. Have you guys seen The Brutalist?
Not yet. I'm really
about
excited to see it.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So talking about vulnerability, there's a couple of scenes between Adrian Brody, it's always with him, with his wife. Like one scene in the bedroom where they hadn't seen each other for 5 years and they're together for the first time. And I felt like I was watching somebody's private moment. I was in the theater with a lot of people and I thought, I have to look away. I can't be watching this. This is like so real and so raw. And I felt like somebody had peeled the curtain, and I was seeing something that wasn't meant for me. That's a vulnerable moment, and the scene when he first comes to America and he sees his cousin for the first time and he's just so happy to be in America. And he's basically sobbing on his cousin's chest, kissing him on the mouth and on the cheek. Those are vulnerable moments. And, we just have this puritanical, weird, version in our heads of what, nudity is like, vulnerable. But I was just there. It wasn't, the vulnerability was the moment really between myself and Dr. Hill when I wake up and I see his face and I see what he is, and his head is not connected to his body. And what the fuck is going on? That's the vulnerable moment. That's the energy that's being passed between he and I in that acting moment. That's the vulnerable moment, not whatever I'm wearing or not wearing.
Right.
So that's my feeling about that.
Absolutely.
I was always curious about this, and I guess it's sort of been answered in the way you talked about Stuart Gordon's approach to this. But sometimes when there's people who play villains, be it killers or whatever in movies, they like to separate themselves from the rest of the cast, or they like to stay in character and do this. Like, what was it like? Because it's David Gale. He just seems so smarmy and sleazy. What was he actually like working with him?
Yeah, I mean, I wish those guys were around, or Stuart was around. I'd have to ask the other guys what they felt about it. What I do, like, did Stewart, sort of egg them on into those performances, or did they come with that? I don't know. But David Gale, in between the scenes, was sweet and kind.
Yeah, that's more like where I was
both of
curious.
them were. Both of them were. I mean, and you touched on David Gale earlier. He was a quite prolific TV actor, and he played a lot of roles and guest stars in many, like a lot. You should look him up on IMDb and see what he did.
Yeah.
So him coming in playing the dean of the school, the college at the time, I mean, that was a no-brainer for him. That was easy. That was a walk in the park. Yes, but playing the crazed maniac, I think probably somewhat he was pushed into or manipulated a little bit, because I know how Stewart worked with all of us. And, I used to say to him, if you could play every part in this movie, you would. Because he had a definite idea about how he wanted you to play your part. So he was a very hands-on director and very forceful with his point of view, which is fine. I wanted to give, I mean, every director is different, and some directors don't want to talk to you. They want you to figure it out. They want you to work with the other actor. Some directors are very camera driven, and it's just what it looks like. And then some directors really get in there with you and work on you. That's true. And work with you on the material. And Stewart was one of those people that was I would call like a very heavy-handed director. So I assume that he took Robert Sampson and molded him from that highbrow, buttoned-up dean into this crazed, reanimated corpse. And I assume that he did the same with David Gale. But both of them were so kind and so sweet and lovely, and we all had a great time together. And I mean, there are famous conversations that people have talked about where David Gale's wife wasn't so happy with what he had to do on screen, and he didn't tell her. So probably the same as the young girl who turned my role down initially. Right. But I mean, I guess that's everybody's sensibilities of what bothers them, and maybe he should have told his wife about it. I don't know. Should he have? I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I mean, probably he should have, because it was a shock to her and she wasn't happy about it. But
I guess he was want to show up in the theater.
But he was so kind. David Gale was so kind to me, and maybe apologetic at times of stuff he had to do, but. Yeah.
I mean, that's vulnerability for those actors as well. You're running the risk of looking pretty silly if this doesn't connect. If the director doesn't have command of this very specific tone, you run the risk of looking kind of absurd. And if you are this August like character actor, known for playing these authority figures, it's a risk, but it's cool to see how they threw themselves into it, and it paid off in the end. I mean, this has become an annual rewatch movie for me. I don't know about you, Jared. You probably watch it at least as many times as I do, but this is a once a year movie, and I get something new out of it every time. I get a new little bit that I admire about it. I think this time I'm watching and I'm like, this movie cooks. This thing moves like nobody's business. Right? Like I look down and then I look up and I'm like, the movie's almost over, because it's so swiftly paced, and it never relents, and it's balancing all these different tones so expertly, and it just all kind of comes together.
I know, it's crazy. Like his first movie out of the gate, like how did they caught lightning in a bottle? It's like everything.
It's like
it's pretty amazing. I mean.
Shay and I try to watch it every year, and we see it in theaters or at drive-ins whenever we can. And one of those movies, it's a lot like RoboCop. There is not a wasted scene or line or moment.
No,
every single moment just drives the movie forward. And there's very few movies you can really say that about, but Re-Animator is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an annual rewatch for Steve, I'm going to say it's probably probably more than an annual. For me, because I try to go any events, any screenings, like Michael said, drive-ins, stuff like that. Plus, I always pop it on in the background. It's become for me with a small, with a handful of movies like Carpenter's Halloween or Dream Warriors and a few that I just I know it so well. It's comforting
Yeah,
for me. So
I
I'll
think
just
that's what
pop it on in the
people think.
background.
Yeah. If you really like a movie and you watch it again and again, they do become those warm blanket comfort movies. It's funny to think of Reanimator as being that for people, but it is.
It's weird, yeah, but it's true. No, it really is true.
Wow. If you haven't figured it out already in our interactions, I am a strange person.
Also a fun movie to watch if you can watch it with someone who's never seen it before. It's always fun because I was at a screening about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was sitting next to this young couple who evidently had never seen it before. And at least half a dozen times the girl went, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
Right? And today it could even be shocking. It is.
Oh,
yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It's like they're
and my last experience
as outrageous as this one. So
my last experience watching it was at the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles, maybe a year ago or so, after it had just opened, and they did a big screening. The American Cinematheque did a big screening for it, sold out in 20 minutes. And that was the first time I had seen it on the big screen in a few years. And pretty much, it's an LA audience. Pretty much everybody who was there is in the movie business. And it was a raucous good time. It was like watching the Rocky Horror Picture Show because everybody knew what was coming and they were laughing hysterically and like stomping their feet and clapping. And it was so fun. It was one of the best experiences that I've ever had in a movie theater of a movie that I've been in. It was like really awesome. Thrilling. Yes, so great.
That's got to be an incredible feeling.
Your description of that matches Roger Ebert's description of seeing the movie for the very first time at the Cannes Film Festival. Like the very first time anyone had seen it, they reacted that way.
Right. Oh,
it was funny.
Go ahead. Yeah, we were talking about that because it was a market screening only. It wasn't like it wasn't a pick for the Cannes Film Festival. It's just at the market. And Roger was from Chicago, and they got sort of a special invitation. They really wanted him to come to the market screening, and somehow they got him to come. I don't think all of, the reviewers or the journalists at the time would go to all the market screenings. They went to the Cannes Film Festival to see the movies that were opening there, and we weren't opening, but he came. Yeah. And he put a review out, and he loved it. And they made a lot of sales at Cannes, and I think, in no small part to his review of the film, because people didn't know what to make of it. They're like, "What is this?" And he's like, "It's amazing, guys." Yeah.
It wasn't just him either. It was we had Pauline Kael.
I was going to say, I think Pauline Kael is the moist quote. That's what it sounds like to me.
I mean, these are critics. I think especially in the 80s, critics were particularly either dismissive or harsh on horror films. So it was kind of a ringing endorsement to have all of these people come out and say, "Yeah, check out."
Well, guess what? They still are.
They still are.
How have I ever gotten a good review in Variety for a movie I've been in? I don't know. I
read some good notices for Suitable Flesh. I read some good notices for Suitable Flesh last year.
Maybe we got a good one for that, but I don't know.
We're very, very good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. But we still get that. We still get dinged by not you guys, but by the the mainstream press. They do judge us very harshly.
That's why it's that's what I was going to say. It's kind of exciting to see the substance, a movie that is very much in conversation with Re-Animator, is getting like Oscars notices this year. It's getting buzz for Demi Moore and maybe for Best Picture, which would be a pretty amazing, the Academy does not put their chips down on horror almost ever. I think Silence of the Lambs and Get Out are like the two that they really kind of vouched for. And for something like a pretty gnarly body horror film to be in conversation as one of the best of the year. I think we're seeing a bit of a tide change in that, but
I think so too.
Not as fast as I want.
Not as fast as we want, but But Hugh Grant in Heretic, I mean, that's a horror film.
He is so good in that movie.
He's so good in it.
Movie. Yeah.
Just get these, like mainstream movie stars to be in these, horror flicks, and that's a great combination, right? If you can get them to sign on.
Or Neon are putting out stuff that's like getting, prestige notices. There's that new Nosferatu soon that I'm dying to see.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, it looks incredible.
Yeah, I can't wait to get out there soon for that one.
Well, critics and they've been much better on horror films, I think, over the last decade or so. You see much more critical respect being given to it. And I was going to say the really cool thing about Re-Animator and the great reviews it got at the time was this was not long after Day of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead had opened. And even though they're cult favorites now, the mainstream reviews were largely negative on both of those.
Yeah.
And Return of the Living Dead has kind of the same tone as Re-Animator. It's very gory, but it's also kind of satirical and funny. And so it was especially noteworthy that after those two largely got panned, Re-Animator came along and got great reviews from lots of newspaper critics like in New York and LA and all over the place. Almost unanimously positive reviews. So that was quite an accomplishment back then.
Yeah.
And even still, this was not like an immediate box office success. It was still considered a bit of a cult film, but once it hit VHS and became like this word of mouth sensation, it started just kind of growing in estimation. And I now think like most of the time, if you're reading a list of the best horror films of all time, Re-Animator is in the top 50, if not higher. Like I think it's reached kind of that status.
Right. I remember when it first came out. Yeah, totally accepted. But I think you're right, Stephen. When it first came out, I said to my agents, "Oh my God, look at these reviews by, as you said, Pauline Kael and Roger Ebert and others. I've arrived. Oh, I'm going to get lots of job offers now. My career is going to happen." And I said that to my agents, and they were like, "I don't know, Barbara. It's a horror movie. No, you're probably not going to. No, this is not going to do that much for you." I was like, "Really?" Yeah. And it burst my bubble at the time, but it did gain its cult status over time, for sure. With regular audiences.
Yeah,
it's stated in American Beauty, which is an Oscar-winning film. So,
right, yeah, they do. They talk about it in American Beauty. That's
it's funny in thinking about the movie. I was trying to place when I would have first saw it, and I said it wasn't in the 80s. It was definitely in the early 90s, but it was before 1999. And the reason I remember that is because I was getting to be the age where I was interested in movies, and I went to see American Beauty by myself in the theater. And when they started talking about Re-Animator, I remember like cheering silently to myself that somebody was talking about this movie. So I was already a fan of it by that point.
Yeah,
sometime between
cool.
You're the Leo DiCaprio meme all of a sudden of like, I know that.
Yeah, that was
Well, you guys, I don't remember this, but what happened when Evil Dead came out? Was that panned, or did the critics like that? Because that came out around the same time too.
The widest range of reviews. I mean, I've done such things since I was a kid. Evil Dead, the LA Times called it a masterpiece. Other papers called it. There was one review that said something like, "This movie is such a turkey that every butterball in the county must get startled into activity when they crank up a reel of this film."
Oh, that's sweaty.
There were reviews that said they appreciated Raimi's craft but didn't really care for the movie. I mean, Evil Dead was also a big box office hit. It became kind of a cult film.
Well, it had the backing of Stephen King also.
Yeah, he gave it that review that got distribution. I think
at the time, even he gave it a good review at the time.
Yeah, he was that was one of the first movies that Stephen King's name was on the poster of, like, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen, and I'm the master of horror. Yeah, I think people kind of treated Evil Dead as like, I remember reading reviews were just like, I don't like this, I don't condone this, but you have to acknowledge that this is a singular piece of work, and it's like maybe the best type of this movie that you could see. But of course, there was always that critical distinction of this movie goes over here. We can admire it as being a good example of this, beneath us kind of stuff. But we're not gonna deign to call it like a good movie. There was always that kind of attitude.
Well, the funny thing is, Evil Dead.
Maybe Re-Animator had a little bit of that too.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like Re-Animator was bucking some of that in a really cool way, which is like, I think it just came out and was just this undeniable object. But even then, the people who were liking it were just like, it is a horror film. It is going to have a lot of gore. It's going to be really gross.
Well, it reminds me in the way it's treated, and Michael could speak more to this because you were more aware of it at the time, but it kind of reminds me of the way people viewed Basket Case at the time.
Oh, sure.
Like it was this thing that was just so out there, that was so different from what people had seen, that it generally, like, I don't know, maybe startled some critics into good reviews who wouldn't normally.
Well, Basket Case never really got a proper release. It really just mostly played midnight shows. And the thing with Re-Animator was it was unrated, so it didn't get the advertising or the book. Another
right.
From Beyond, they went with the R rating. This is at a time when there was a new independent horror film practically every weekend.
Yeah.
And so there's so much stuff coming out. I don't think it got lost, but I think that even though it got the good reviews, it came out, it played to the horror crowd for a couple of weeks, and then the next thing came along, So, and then again, when it came out on video, people really had a chance to discover it. So,
Well, and Charlie Band even says in his autobiography, it's just like, critics just didn't bother with most of what I put out, which is why the positive response to Re-Animator was so surprising, because, I think early in his career with like Ghoulies and stuff, people would come out and they would review it, and then they pretty quickly decided that like it was below their contempt, and they would stop kind of writing about it. And then into the Full Moon stuff, Full Moon was direct to video, which was being seen as a lesser than form of cinema at the time, and so most critics just weren't approaching it at all. So it is really unique that Re-Animator was able to cross over in this way.
Well, what about Tourist Trap when that first came out? What kind of response?
Loathed at the time. Loathed at the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really?
People hated it. Yeah.
It's so good. I love that.
It is so good. It's so fun.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
It was hated by people. I just think it was kind of under the radar because, it was a small independent film. Excuse me. I don't think it really got reviewed very much in the mainstream. I don't recall anyone reviewing it in the New York area. It just
it's also one of the oddest PG ratings.
Oh yeah,
it is PG. Yeah, that's weird.
A lot like It's Alive was PG at the time. I mean, the 70s you got away with a lot with a PG rating.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But I know Stephen King was one of the first people to praise Tourist Trap. I think in his book Danse Macabre, he sung its praises. So he's been very influential in praising these movies and getting them seen.
And one of the ones that jumps out to me, I mean, we've obviously talked a little bit about From Beyond because it's kind of impossible to talk about Re-Animator and Stuart Gordon and have Barbara here without talking about From Beyond also. But like the, buttoned up Gene Siskel loved From Beyond, which I always found to be so funny because of the two. I mean, there was a time in the 80s where those two were really crusading against a lot of stuff that was coming out. I mean, so much so that, they published the twist ending to Friday the 13th so people wouldn't go see it.
Yeah.
Type thing in their reviews.
That's terrible.
Let's first of all, not to get on a tangent here, but when Siskel spoiled the ending of Friday the 13th, he gave it the longest spoiler warning I have ever read.
Fair.
He didn't just come out and he said, I'm going to tell you the ending because I don't want you to see this movie. He didn't just blurt it out. Secondly, Forrest J. Ackerman spoiled the entirety of Friday the 13th in Famous Monsters magazine a month before that movie came out.
No way.
He had an entire synopsis with photos, including of Jason, on the cover. So anyway.
Oh no, he wrapped around it?
Why? What is that? What reason is that for?
They were promoting the movie and Jason was like a monster of sorts, so they put him on the cover.
Yeah, I guess
anyway,
so. Yeah.
That's funny.
That's my thing I need to drop in when we talk about Friday the 13th. Yeah. And also, Siskel was practically the only mainstream critic who gave a positive review to John Carpenter's The Thing at the time.
Yeah.
Every so often he got one right.
And lest we forget, Carnosaur. Big fan of Carnosaur.
Look up Siskel and Ebert's Carnosaur review on YouTube.
It's infamously one of their most contentious fights was over the movie Carnosaur, which I still think is very funny. The Roger Corman film. Yeah.
And sometimes just to make myself laugh, I'll watch the clip of them reviewing Friday the 13th, the final chapter, so I can see Roger Ebert calling the movie a moral and irreprehensible piece of trash.
We've taken the bucket to the cesspool 4 times now for this sludge.
Yep. Oh my God. I miss it.
From Beyond actually got a big kind of publicity push, at least in New York. That's where this beautiful Pineapple Sun Visor came from. There's a wonderful publicist named Jonathan Martyr in New York City who would handle a lot of the B movies and exploitation films. And he handled all of the Empire stuff as it came through. And so he arranged for a big roundtable interview with Stewart, which was the first time I ever met him. So it was me and several other college students and fan press, and we all got there. We got our pineal gland visors and had a really wonderful discussion with him. And the one thing I'll always remember him talking about is, the famous scene in the morgue. So we asked about that, and he's like, I still remember Dennis Paoli calling me up at like 2 a.m. or something and saying, I think I've come up with the screen's first visual pun.
Yeah.
And and he said, I thought it was pretty great, and we decided to go for it. So
that's so good.
And Dennis Paoli told some pretty good stories. He the Brooklyn Horror Society did a screening of From Beyond maybe like 6 months ago or so with a Q&A with him, which was really great. And then they did the Colonial Theater in Pennsylvania had that Jeffrey Combs retrospective, and I was there for the night of Re-Animator. And I meant to say this earlier, just when Steve, or maybe it was Barbara, brought up Bruce Abbott in the lead. And that was, you were saying, Barbara, how he likes to kind of, he doesn't always lean into the this is me persona. I think the first thing he said in the Q&A was, Bruce Abbott is the MVP of this movie. That was the first thing out of his mouth. And because he didn't want people to direct, accolades towards him. He pushed them towards recognizing Bruce Abbott's performance, because I do think like it's really important to have a straight man like that who's believable. And I think he just does such a good job. I think watching the movie, and maybe the first time you see it, you're most drawn to him. But then as you watch it a few more times, you start to notice the nuances of the other characters. And I just really, especially the last, I don't know, however many times I've watched the movie, I've really enjoyed Bruce Abbott's performance. And I think both of them are fun. And Bride of Re-Animator 2, as also David Gale has some fun moments in that one too. But I just feel
Abbott has some fun stuff here because he on paper is kind of the straight man, right? He's handsome and he's got his whole thing together, and he's kind of upwardly mobile, sort of the jock character, right? The dynamic kind of reminded me, speaking of Stephen King, it kind of reminded me of Christine, how there's like this sort of protective sort of jock figure, and he's kind of tied his fate with this squirrely little weirdo. But there's something that Bruce Abbott gets to play with here that Christine doesn't really hit at, which is that he's curious too. Like there is a part of his primal like lizard brain that is curious about what Herbert is doing and wants a little bit to get in on it, even though he has to kind of like, cover his eyes for a lot of what he's doing. And that's an interesting wrinkle to explore. And I think he plays that very, very well. That like he's discovering dark new things inside himself, and he's not happy with what he's finding. And I think that comes across.
Right. I think that's true. And I also want to tell you guys and your listeners, playing the straight guy and playing the role that is sort of the bedrock of the film, which he did, is harder than playing a very showy role. And I often
100%.
see in reviews of movies and things, people say, oh, that guy stole the show. That guy stole the movie. Well, yeah, he had the best part. I mean, I think Jeffrey had a great part. And he rose to that occasion better than anybody. And he deserves all the accolades he gets continually for years for that performance. But to play the straight person and be interesting and be compelling and to be somebody that people can relate to is much harder, is a hard job. And that's why this past year at Beyond Fest, Evan Absoy, who's the head of Beyond Fest, asked me to do the Ladies of Elm Street because it was their 40th anniversary this year. And he said, we want to show the movie, but we want you to interview all the ladies. And I was like, I'm down for that, because Freddie is like the star of the film now, and he, everybody talks about him, and he was great in that. But so was Heather Langenkamp. So was Amanda Wyss. I mean, they were, and so was
Ronnie Blakely. Yeah, amazing.
And I mean, you can't have a compelling villain without a compelling and interesting hero or heroine.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm Jeffrey and I both talk about Bruce a lot, and this year, I, along with an artist, and we're going to reveal this coming up soon, have created a licensed 40th anniversary poster for Reanimator.
Oh.
And,
awesome.
yeah, and one of the things I said, and I talked to the artist about it, but I also consulted with Bruce and with Brian and with Jeffrey. I said, I really want Bruce to be kind of front and center on the poster, because he doesn't get that as much. And also, he's not sort of working so much in the business anymore, and he does other things. And I just feel like on this 40th anniversary, I really want to showcase Bruce and the wonderful work that he does in the movie. And I want people to celebrate that aspect of the film as well as everything else we love about the movie. So that's like my personal crusade for this company.
Yeah. Well, it's cool to see that you guys still have like that love and that camaraderie that is still there. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
And to what you said before, it's interesting that then in From Beyond, your character is kind of like Bruce's character, and then you submit to the dark side,
right?
And you go
to
yeah, you get to be a little of both in that one, which is really.
I get to be a little Jeffrey and a little Bruce. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're bringing your own energy to it, and it's really fun.
It's one of the things I find most interesting about the movie is that there is no villain or straight man or whatever. Everyone's just kind of sucked into this whole situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what just occurred to me too? We do actually have one more secret Stuart Gordon to cover. We haven't talked about the evil clergyman, which was
you're right. Yeah.
Which was rediscovered kind of fairly recently and restored. So we do still have that to look forward to. Another entry in the Barbara Jeffrey Stewart collaboration that has yielded so many fun projects. So I'm excited to check that one out.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that one.
I've never seen it. No, I have not seen it yet. A lot of the movies for this show we're watching for the first time, or especially me. I'm kind of saving them so that they're fresh when we get to it. But the Re-Animator was kind of one of the driving forces behind us doing this show to begin with, because I think we were having this conversation. We're like, all right, we're gonna have to watch a lot of kind of hard to sit through movies, a lot of like softcore porn, a lot of like bad family films, a lot of like things like that, but then we also get to watch Re-Animator.
No.
Beyond. Yeah,
we didn't. This was, I think, Re-Animator might be the driving force for why we changed the mission statement of the show from a Full Moon Features podcast to a Charles Band podcast, because we looked ahead at all the Full Moon stuff, and it's like, well, there's good stuff in there in the Full Moon stuff for sure, but it's like, but I want to talk about Re-Animator, and I want to talk about From Beyond, and it's like, all right, well, we can do Empire. Well, no. It was like, we do Empire. And it was like, okay, so it's Empire and Full Moon. Shit. But I also want to talk about Laser Blast, and I want to talk about Tourist Trap. And so then it was like just anything. Yeah. Cinderella, fairy tales.
Cinderella/fairy tales.
Like, I want to talk about all of that stuff. So it really, I think it was Re-Animator is the thing, the catalyst for broadening our mission statement for the show.
Okay, I don't know if you guys are aware, but Charlie has a son named Zalman Band. Okay, and he wrote and directed a movie that I'm in. So he's following in the footsteps of his father. Like, for a while, they didn't know if he was going to continue in the movie business or do something else, but he's been writing scripts for a number of years, and I got sent something, and I read it, and I was like, this is really good. So Charlie doesn't do SAG movies anymore, but this is a SAG film, And there's some really interesting people involved that haven't even been named yet. So
Cool.
it's called Subscriber.
Subscriber.
So
When do you know when that one's coming out? Do you have an idea?
No, they're just in post now, and then they'll probably take it to film festivals and then try to sell it. They don't have a pre-sale on it right now.
Cool.
I haven't seen any of the movie, but they tell me it's pretty good. So I'm excited about it. It's
multi-generation.
Cool. Yeah, I was really excited about that. And he was wonderful to work with too. Yeah. And Charlie is still a friend of mine. I mean, we have dinner together and I see him and we hang out. And so now I'm friends with his son, friends with his ex-wife, friends with his new wife. I mean, it's just, I'm still part of their family kind of. So I was really happy to be in a movie that's Alma directed.
That's really cool. I'm excited to see that one when that comes out. Do we have any final thoughts? I don't want to be keeping y'all here forever and ever because I could absolutely do that. So do we have any final thoughts to wrap up and we can let everybody go here?
I mean, I would just say that, this is the first podcast. I don't know when your podcast is coming out, but we're recording it today. I'm really happy that people still have a love and an interest in this film. And it's certainly the film that started me on my trajectory of my career, even though I didn't realize it until many years later. It dawned on me. I went, oh, I'm a horror movie actress. This is what I do. But it started me on this journey, and I'll always be thankful and grateful to the fans for watching this film and for, keeping up with the career of Stuart Gordon and all the things he did after that. And I really appreciate the fans and I love this movie so much. It means so much to me. And I'm so excited for next year. We've already been booked into a few conventions, and film festivals are calling me all the time saying, please, will you come? Can we show the movie? Will you come? I'm going to be so busy next year celebrating the movie. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, you're going to have to watch Re-Animator many times this year, probably.
Well, I could watch the beginning and then go out and get a cocktail and come back.
That works too. Hopefully a bright green cocktail in keeping with the spirit of the film here.
Yeah, after I saw The Substance the first time, I texted Steve and I said, I never really gave so much thought to the fact that I think I just really like movies that are based around neon green substances. Like if you put a neon green substance in a vial, like it already automatically gets an extra star in my rating.
Look, I was a Ninja Turtles kid. I get it. I understand. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, no, that's a great first movie. It's a great first one to look back on and have. It's like such a one to be proud of. And it's amazing that you're getting to talk about it, 40 years later.
That's amazing. What Larry Fessenden said to me, because I worked with Larry and Jacob's wife, who's, he's one of my dear friends. And he said, Barbara, you're really lucky because he goes, he has Habit. Habit's one of my favorite movies ever. And
I love
my favorite
Habit.
Larry movie.
Great.
But and we talked about that. He goes, yeah, but I don't have a Re-Animator, Barbara. Like you have a Re-Animator. And I was like, really? Do you think that is, I don't know. Maybe I do now. I don't know. I don't know what I think or how much, but coming from Larry to say that to me, he goes, but you have Re-Animator. I was like, Larry, you're like a god. You're like a cinema god. And you said that to me. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool,
I just can't believe it's been 40 years. And because I can still remember going to see the movie, this was back when independent horror films were playing, as I said, on a regular basis in theaters and fairly wide release. And this has gone through so many changes, with all the different advents of video and just the fact that Re-Animator has had so many lives on VHS and then Laserdisc, Blu-ray, and on 4K, and it's just endured. It's one of those movies that never gets old, and it's so crazy to think, how young I was when I first saw it, and yet here we are 40 years later, and it's still relevant, and we're still talking about it, and
it's crazy.
Us about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love this movie very, very much. It's very dear to me as well. If you love what we do on the show, you can jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop us a 5-star rating, maybe a brief review as well, if you feel so inclined to do so. If you want to keep up with the show, our social medias like Instagram are one of the best ways to do that. You can follow the show at @PuppetMasters_Castle Freaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jared or Steve at Minotaur Matador. You can also see our posts on Blue Sky and Threads and audio versions of our shows on our YouTube channel as well. It sounds like a lot, but it's not the only show that Steve is recording, editing, and putting out for you guys. So Steve, what else have you got going on?
Well, I also have a show I do called Cinema Arcade, which is cinema and arcade mashed together. That is what we do on the show. We are watching movies and then playing the video games based on those movies. We are months in advance with this episode right now. We're not releasing this for quite a long time, so I have no idea where we are in that show right now. But we have nearly 100 episodes out there for you to track down and find, everything from The Wizard of Oz to Puppet Master, everything in between. So we're going to have all of that stuff out there. Before we plug next week's episode, I want to find out if Michael, Barbara, do either of you have anything to plug or promote or anything? This is going to be coming out in March, I believe.
Okay.
We're way ahead.
Right.
Ways in advance.
Well, if you promise not to reveal it now, because it hasn't been announced yet, but it'll be announced in a couple of weeks. The 4K, a new 4K versions of RE-ANIMATOR is coming out, and it's going to be available for pre-buy, like in a few weeks, I think before Christmas, but it is coming out in March. So by the time your listeners listen to this, everybody will have known. So
Amazing.
I guess I can reveal that to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. I'm
Our
setting
lips
a
are
Google
sealed.
alert now. This is good to know. I need to get that. That's amazing.
Yeah, so
and
don't tell anyone that I told it in advance.
No,
Like on social media today.
No.
Yeah.
Yes,
Take it to the grave.
Yeah,
And Michael, how about you?
Well, I'm continuing to write for Fangoria and Rue Morgue and work on Blu-ray featurettes. I've finished a couple. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention what they are. I'm not sure if they'll have been announced even by March when people are hearing this. I can also say that sometime this year, 2025, my second novelization is coming out. Again, I don't know when it'll be announced, so I can't unfortunately say the title, but keep an eye out for it because it'll be out definitely before the end of the year.
Very cool. I'm just going to shamelessly plug our older episode on Cinderella and Fairy Tales once again with Michael, because that was one of the most fun episodes that I think we've recorded. It's such a weird topic, and I think we were all very slap happy and really trying to find some nuance in those movies, which is a lot of fun to try and dig into. We love having you here, Michael. Thank you so much for being back.
And let's take this opportunity also to plug one of our earliest episodes, which was on From Beyond with Nathan Rabin. And that was really early in the run of the show. We got that one kind of out of the way quickly. And so we have a whole, hour plus conversation on that one. If you just scroll back through our feed, you'll find it from about 18 months ago or something like that.
And we have a few more Barbara movies too. We covered Robot Wars, Puppet Master, of course, which you have a cameo in. There were a few more. Yeah. So you're prolific in our podcast.
Trancers too. Yeah.
Trancers too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's truly been a thrill and a delight for me personally to have you here, Barbara. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk on our goofy little podcast. And we love this movie, and I'm so excited that there's going to be a year of celebrating RE-ANIMATOR.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Thank you guys for having me on. Great talking to all of you.
Absolutely.
Right.
And Steve, what have we got coming up next week for our listeners?
Still very much in the ether, so don't quote me on this. I might jump in and change it. But as of right now, the movie that we have earmarked for the next episode is called Deathbed by Danny Draven. What year did that one come out? I forget. It's
2002, and it has a Stuart Gordon connection as well.
It does. That's right. Yeah. So I'm not familiar with this. I'm familiar with a different Deathbed. We were talking about how many different movies are called Deathbed, but this is the 2002 version. So I'm excited to check it out.
Well, thank you again to Michael Gingold and Barbara Crampton for taking the time to join us. We will see you next time for Deathbed, and hopefully you get a chance to celebrate RE-ANIMATOR and its 40th anniversary in some kind of fun way this year. And feel free to write us at puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com to tell us all about how you are consuming RE-ANIMATOR for this amazing 40th anniversary. See you guys next time.